Hello and welcome back to my channel. I'm Savannah J. Goins, author of young adult fantasy novel The Gwythinian. Today I am doing round number 2 of Animals in Fiction Q&A. So starting off the questions today is Alyssa, and she asks, how do you create new fantasy creatures without just making them seem like a mismatch of animals that exist in our world? So that is a really great question because all the fantasy animals that I can think of are somewhat of a mismatch of animals that already exist in our world. So I guess the thing would be to maybe try to come up with unique combinations that maybe aren't already super common. We have like the hippogriff that J.K. Rowling mentions in Harry Potter. I'm not sure whether she made that up or whether she got that from mythology. If you do know, let me know in the comments. But I know that's much less common of a character than a griffin. You know, we hear about griffins a lot more often. So maybe coming up with more unique combinations that you don't see quite as often would be a good way to do it. But things like dragons and griffins and unicorns, I mean, all those things that, we've heard of 1,000 times, those are still really interesting characters that can totally be used again in a new way. Something else besides just like their appearance would be to think of like the personality traits they may have, and how you could mix those personality traits or those other characteristics that you think of when you think of like the mix of those animals. So if you have like a cat, so if you have a creature that's like a mix between a cat and something else, it may have like the characteristics of a cat that's kind of sneaky, kind of slinks around, good at, getting in and out of places fast. And if you were to pair that with some kind of an animal that has the opposite kind of expectation of characteristics, you might have a really fun time mixing those characteristics together and deciding which one is going to come out the strongest as a whole in this species or in just this individual character. You could definitely do a lot of interesting things with it, and I don't think that there's really any wrong way to mix different animals as you're creating your own characters. So have fun with that. I love doing that, and I look forward to finding out what kind of exciting things you come up with. Question number 2 comes from Justin, who asks, how do eagles define their territories? So I'm going to assume we're talking about bald eagles here. I actually did not know the answer to this question to start off with, and I asked my friend who is a wildlife raptor rehabber, and so they keep watch over their territories more with sight than with anything else. They're not really paying attention to smells as much or to sounds as much, but they really, you've heard the term eagle-eyed. They're just keeping a watch around all the time. And the way that they define their territory, it's not like with scent marking, like with dogs, but, if a character comes too close into their territory, that they'll see that and they'll attack them. So there's not really a clear definition probably to animals that may accidentally wander into their territory. It's maybe a little bit unfair, but they have an idea in their mind of how close is too close with other animals, and if they see them coming into what they consider their territory, they'll fight them. And our next question is from Rhino, who asks, who says, I would like to know in what way would it be possible for animals to talk without using telepathy? Yes, I have heard people saying it is impossible, but I haven't heard anyone complaining about The Jungle Book or Narnia. Any opinions? So we don't really know. So the way that animals communicate in real life is through body language. When rabbits are mad, they thump. When cats are telling you that you're getting too close, they hiss. A dog would growl. A dog might also, show their teeth. A cat might open her mouth as she's hissing at you. There are a lot of ways that animals communicate their feelings to other animals within their species or within other species, just by some sounds and also just by movement, the way they're positioning their body, the movements they make. Those are all ways that animals communicate. So as far as we know, animals don't have like a telepathic language they can communicate with each other with. That'd be kind of cool, especially if we could get in on that. But as far as we know, that is not a thing that exists. So, but that's only in real life. And fortunately, we write fantasy, so we can do whatever in the world we want with how animals communicate. The first book that I remember really thinking of animals communicating like in your mind through telepathy was Aragon, and I really enjoyed that book series, and I think you can definitely do a lot of fun things with that. But no, nobody that I know of is complaining about the Jungle Book or Narnia or how people are communicating with animals. You can make animals be talking animals, like those two examples where they actually just talk to you in the same language. Maybe you could have animals that, you know, they only speak the animal a verbal language, but only animals speak it. And when a human comes to their jungle, they have to learn how to speak each other's language, which is still a verbal language. You know, that. And you can also have animals communicate with each other and with humans just through a language, but in the mind, like with thoughts, you know, telepathically instead of with words. And you can also still, of course, use body language. It's a really good way to show rather than tell in stories. So, so I hope that answers your question. If not, let me know and I will do a better job. Judith says, my first book is set in World War II. The Border Collie is a battalion's mascot. During a bombing, he endures broken branches digging into him and is shot in the left chest near the left shoulder as he runs through a forest. The bullet exits on the left side. Could a dog survive running 2 miles in that condition? How best to describe the injury from the bullet? It's a very interesting question. So it really depends on which exact part of the chest the bullet hits. Your heart is on the left side, so if it is, you know, toward the center, slightly to the left, it could go through his heart, and that would kill him pretty instantly. If it's very, very far over, kind of more like in his armpit area, if it just barely went through him or barely grazed him and was able to miss his lungs, he could definitely still run 2 miles. It'd be very painful and he would bleed a lot, and he might pass away once he reached his destination from all the blood loss, but he could probably still make the run. Someone else, though, did comment on this. This was a question from Facebook, and someone commented the type of bullets they would have been using in this situation would have blown up and caused too much damage to the dog to have survived no matter how it hit him. So I don't know anything about bullets in World War II, so props to this person for knowing his bullet history. That's pretty cool. If it were like a 22, like a kind of thing that I would maybe have a little more experience with, he could definitely survive that and make a trek still, even with that going on. Ways to describe it. You know, did the bullet, let's see, you did say the bullet exited, right? Yeah, so it did exit, so he's going to have 2 places that are bleeding. You know, as he's running, his blood pressure is going to be up higher, so it's going to be bleeding a lot more than it would be if he was able to slow down and let it heal. If it went through his heart, you know, that's going to cause a lot of internal bleeding, but that's not really necessarily anything you would see. You would just see him, you know, pass away pretty quickly. So also, the broken branches digging into him, I'm not sure how far into him they're going. I mean, if he's just like running through shrubbery and like some thorns and branches are catching on him, there's probably going to be some cuts. He might have some places where like the fur is kind of gone from all the cuts. He'll probably have some scabs eventually after that. But if the sticks are actually penetrating into him, he's going to have a lot of risk of infection and he's going to be bleeding a lot worse. And, you know, if he's got that sticks going into him and a bullet, depending on where the bullet goes, he's going to have a harder time getting that 2 mile distance, and he's less likely to survive once he does from all the blood loss from that. And if he did survive all that miraculously, he would need to get on some antibiotics because that would be a great situation for septicemia. Thank you, Judith, for this question, and thank you to the person who knows his World War II bullets and commented the extra information there on Facebook. Kimberly asks another bird question. She says, one of my characters is a barn owl, and people have told me she shouldn't be able to hear as well as she does. Do you know what owls' hearing is like? So owls actually can hear pretty well, and if you want to see something really weird, Google great horned owl ears. They are not what you would expect them to look like. With great horned owls, they have their little feather tufts up here that look like ears. Those are not actually ears. Their ears are like over here, and they're really weird looking. If you move their feathers out of the way, they're really weird looking. So you should look them up just to see what weird owl ears look like. But while, you know, sight is pretty big for them, hearing is probably their second greatest sense. So they do hear pretty well. There's animals that would hear better than them. I can't think of one off the top of my head, but I doubt that your owl is hearing too well for owl abilities. If you would like to send me like a little section about it, an example of it, of you showing that it's hearing something, that might give me a better idea of whether that sounds like something an owl would not be likely to hear. So if you want to send me that, feel free to email me or Facebook message me, and I will take a look at that and let you know a little bit better of an answer if I have a little bit more information. But I actually love barn owls. Barred owls with a D on the end, those are actually my favorite owls. But barn owls are another one of my favorites because they're funny little heart-shaped faces. They're pretty cool. So Heather asks, how do I find a balance between mentioning too many details in describing animals in my stories and mentioning too few? This is a great question. I happen to know that Heather is a veterinarian, so she and I have very similar interests in writing and in day jobbing. And I totally understand this question. And, and I don't know that I have the greatest answer to this one. I think describe the heck out of it at first, and then let your beta readers and your editor tell you what parts might be too much. That's what I would recommend. That's what I would do, because you're going to come up with like some great ideas as you're describing even just a regular horse, or if you have like a hippogriff, or some crazy cool made up thing. If it's made up, you're going to need to describe it more just so people know what to imagine. Because even if it's something like a griffin that has been made up 100 times, yours could be a little bit different somehow. I mean, there are some griffins that have eagle front feet, and some griffins have lion front feet, like they're lion back feet. So it's, it's important to describe things that people don't already know what they look like. Now, a quarter horse, somebody already knows what a horse looks like, and general public and they may probably know what kind of colors a quarter horse usually is. So you may not need as much description in that situation, but still describe it. Err on the side of describing too much, and then let your beta readers and editors help you decide which parts to leave, because you may, as you're trying to decide how much to cut, you may cut the wrong parts because of what you think is important versus what other people may think is important, and you want to make sure that the reader who's going to be reading it is going to be enjoying it and visualizing what you want them to see. So yeah, that is my advice there, and I'll be taking that myself as well. Great question though, thank you. Tamara says that a future story has a mouse guard for a cat. Both talk. I know that mice can stand on their hind legs, but can they walk, or would they revert to scurrying on all fours? So I have worked with a ton of mice in my life, so I can tell you that they don't walk on their two legs. I don't know of any situation where someone might have especially trained them to. Like, you can sometimes train a dog to walk on their back two legs for a couple steps to get a treat. As far as I know, nobody's trained a mouse to do that. Mice definitely don't just do that on their own. They will stand up, but they will then go back to all fours to, scurry around. However, since we write fantasy, you can do whatever you want with this. You can give it wings, or you can make it walk on 2 feet if you want to. Reepicheep, the mouse from the Chronicles of Narnia, is like one of my favorite characters ever. So, in this story, it depends on how fantasy-ish it is, or magical realism-ish, or, realistic. If it's totally realistic and the mouse doesn't have, like, the ability to talk or anything like that, if it's not that kind of a character, you may want to let it just crawl around on its 4 legs as, to be more accurate. However, if it's fantasy, do whatever you want with it, and it will be awesome. Kimberly says, I'm writing a middle grade story, and the premise involves a main character who's a girl with an auditory processing disorder, which turns out it's not actually a disorder, but an evolution. It's a very interesting idea. So she can hear a wider frequency of sound than typical humans, including the noises that bats make when they echolocate. The story hinges around bats, but I'm starting to think about how she might interact with other animals. I know dogs hear a wider spectrum of sound than humans, so I'm wondering what are some things that animals experience in the terms of sound that may translate to my main character. For example, I'd love to have a scene in which her dog and her get spooked by something that no one else can hear, or she experiences a bird song in a way that ordinary people wouldn't, or in which something like the warning signals of a meerkat guard would make sense to her but no one else. I love this idea. This is such a fantastic idea. So some thoughts on this would be, so there's lots of great instances here for showing rather than telling, and you can do some really cool things. I do not know about meerkats. and how they signal each other, but you could definitely do some research into that. I think of dolphins when I think of echolocating, bats, of course, as you mentioned. Also, elephants are able to hear a lower frequency sound, like a sound that's so low frequency we can't hear it. I do know that. But you can definitely do a lot more research into each of these kinds of animals. Unfortunately, I don't know a whole lot more than that. I will say though, with bats, bats are a bats bats are a vector for rabies, and I've actually come into contact with bats this year that did test positive for rabies. So since this is middle grade, I would encourage you to think really carefully about how you're involving the bats, because I know I love to have like your animal friend character sitting on your main character's shoulder, and my sugar glider character does that. But with bats, I would just urge you to be really careful and keep in mind that kids might, some kids might try to go out and handle a bat. I don't know, but just be really careful with how you portray them, just to try to protect kids from going out and trying to catch them. Because if you get bit by a bat, that's really not good. If it does have rabies, rabies is basically not curable. If you catch it right after it happens, you can go through a whole bunch of awful treatments and get it taken care of, but it actually incubates in your body for about a month before it starts showing, and by the time you start having some of the symptoms, it's too late to be treated. So rabies is really, really horrible. I'm vaccinated against it because I do come in contact with so many rabies vectors like bats and raccoons, but I would just urge you to be careful. I don't know if you could teach kids about rabies through this at all. I don't want to ruin your idea with bats at all. I think that's great, but just keep rabid bats being a real thing in the back of your mind as you're creating this. I just love the part about her experiencing a bird song differently than anybody else. I don't know how you would describe that, but I hope that you tell me about your book when it comes out, because I would love to read how she hears those things differently. I think that's super cool. And, the book could end up being really encouraging and entertaining to people of like the deaf community and the hearing impaired community. So that could definitely be really, really cool and a great audience for your book. So I don't know where your story takes place, but maybe do some Google searches of some of the animals in the area. I doubt she's in Africa. If she is, she'll maybe come in contact with elephants. Maybe she could go to the zoo in wherever she lives and come into contact with an elephant there. And there are just so many cool things you could do with this, but just do some research on whatever animal she's going to come in contact with, and some Google searches should give you some decent information about how the auditory processes work in other animals. I don't recommend Google for health questions. If your animal is sick, take it to a vet. Don't go to Dr. Google, because Dr. Google's wrong most of the time, but Google with echolocation and auditory stuff probably does have some decent stuff. Another tip is if you type in scholarly articles for echolocation in bats or something, if you just add scholarly articles, you'll get some legit stuff that you can actually trust, that's not just a bunch of phooey on the internet. A lot of times you have to pay to get access to the article, but you can at least see the abstract and sometimes a little bit more, and that might give you enough information of what you need. You probably don't want to read the whole million-page long article anyway. So if you do a search with those words, you might at least get the abstract of a paper, and you can read, the main points, kind of like the book blurb of the medical journal paper. So little tip there that might be fun for research. And that is all the questions I have for today. Real quick, I also just wanted to add a little disclaimer. I am not giving any medical advice. As a registered veterinary technician, I have a lot of medical education and experience, but I am not a vet, so I cannot legally diagnose, prognose, prescribe, or perform surgery. So please don't try to get medical advice out of me. I want to help you as much as I can, but if your animal is sick, I cannot help you, and you need to go to your vet to have it seen. And a lot of times, if you have an exotic animal, a lot of times they get sick really fast, and by the time you're seeing signs, it's pretty progressed. So I do recommend, if you're ever worried about your animal's health, please go take it to a vet. There are fewer exotic vets around than there are cat and dog vets for sure, but there's probably one within a couple hours of you. So I definitely recommend looking into that if you are concerned about your animal's health. Please tell me in the comments which you thought was the most interesting little tidbit of info about animals today. If you have any other questions about animals in fiction, please comment those for me, send them to me in a message. I would love to answer them for you. And if I don't know the answer, I will ask my raptor guy or find somebody else who knows a little bit more about me and can give you some info. And if you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up to support my channel. And if you'd like to see more of my writing tips videos and animals in fiction Q&A videos, please hit the subscribe button, and to be notified as soon as I post, hit the bell icon. Until next time, have fun making words happen, and I will see you guys next week. Bye.